My name is Denise, and I'm 58 years old. I live alone in the same two-story home my late husband and I built together 3 decades ago. Every creak of the floorboards still echoes with memories of laughter, birthdays, arguments, and the quiet comfort of family life. For most of my adult years, that house wasn't just my shelter, it was my story. I had one son, Trevor. For years, he was my reason for waking up every morning. When his father passed away from a heart attack 15 years ago, Trevor became the center of my world. He was just 17 then. Lost, angry, and confused. I did everything I could to hold him together, to fill both parental roles. I thought we had an unbreakable bond. For a long time, we really did. Trevor was kind, funny, and fiercely protective of me. He'd call every day, stop by on weekends, and insist on helping with chores I didn't even need help with. I used to tell my friends, "I don't worry about growing old, I have a son who loves me." But that changed when Alina entered the picture. I remember the first time he mentioned her, his voice carried that tone that only young love can bring. "Mom, she's incredible," he said, grinning ear to ear. I was genuinely happy for him. After all, he had spent years focused on work and barely socialized. Seeing him excited again made me hopeful. Alina came into our lives like a fresh breeze, but that breeze quickly turned into a cold draft. She was beautiful, sharp, and confident, but there was something about her smile that felt practiced. When Trevor introduced us over dinner, she was polite but oddly observant. Her eyes moved around the house, taking in every detail as if she were studying it. At first, I dismissed the uneasy feeling. I told myself I was being overprotective, maybe even jealous. But over time, I began to see changes in Trevor, subtle ones at first. He stopped calling as often. Our conversations became shorter. His laughter, once genuine, felt forced. A few months later, he started criticizing me in small ways. "Mom, you shouldn't live alone," he'd say. "This house is too big for you." Or, "You need to think about your future, what if something happens?" At first, I appreciated his concern. But soon, those words became less about care and more about control. Alina joined the conversations, often with a sweet but condescending tone. "Denise, have you ever thought about downsizing?" she asked once. "You could sell this place and live somewhere more manageable, like a condo near us. Trevor worries about you, you know." I smiled politely, but inside, I felt my stomach twist. Something about the way she said "sell this place" made me uneasy. I brushed it off, but that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would they care where I lived? Why were they so insistent? Over the next few weeks, their visits became more frequent and oddly transactional. Trevor would bring brochures about senior living communities and casually bring up financial security in conversation. Alina would nod along, pretending to be helpful. But her eyes always flicked toward the family photos hanging in the hallway, as if she were sizing up her future inheritance. I remember one particular Sunday vividly. They came over for lunch. I had made roast chicken, Trevor's favorite since childhood, but he barely touched it. Instead, he started talking about smart financial planning. "Mom, you know the market's good right now," he said. "You could sell this house for a fortune and live comfortably for the rest of your life." I frowned. "Trevor, I am comfortable. This house is my comfort." He exchanged a look with Alina. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was smug. "We're just saying," she added softly. "It's not safe for you to be alone here forever. You could sign the place over to Trevor, let him handle it." That was the moment. The air in the room shifted. My fork froze midway to my mouth. I stared at her, then at my son. His eyes didn't meet mine. I set my fork down. "Sign it over to Trevor?" I asked quietly. "Why would I do that?" Trevor shrugged, still avoiding my gaze. "Just thinking ahead. It's better to plan these things before it's too late." I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed hard and forced a calm tone. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not signing anything. This house isn't just property, it's my life." For a moment, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Alina leaned back, crossing her arms, clearly displeased. Trevor finally looked at me, and in that instant, something in his eyes frightened me. It wasn't disappointment or frustration. It was calculation. After that day, I noticed more changes. He stopped calling altogether. When he did visit, it was only to bring up the house again. Every time I said no, his patience thinned. The kindness in his voice disappeared. One night, after another tense conversation, he stood up abruptly, his face tight with anger. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "You can't take this house to your grave, Mom." I tried to hold my ground. "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But I can decide who gets it and when." He didn't respond. He just stared at me for a long moment. The silence that followed was deafening. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, I looked around at the walls that had witnessed my entire life. The laughter, the love, the heartbreak. For the first time, I felt unsafe in my own home. That night, I realized something dark had awakened in my son, and I didn't know how far he'd go to get what he wanted. Trevor started visiting again, but this time, with a plan. It happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice at first. After weeks of silence, he began showing up again, all smiles and charm, acting as if nothing had ever happened. The first time he knocked on my door, holding a small bouquet of daisies, my heart foolishly fluttered with hope. I thought maybe he wanted to make amends. He hugged me, told me he missed me, and for a few minutes, I almost believed the old Trevor was back. But then, over coffee, he casually mentioned that he and Alina had been talking about my future. That phrase again, my future. He said things like, "Mom, you've worked hard your whole life. You deserve to relax, and wouldn't it be nice to live somewhere smaller, with less to worry about?" I knew what he was really saying, but I played along, smiling and nodding, pretending not to see the manipulation behind the kindness. A few days later, he showed up again, this time with Alina. She strutted into my home like she owned it, running her hand along the banister as if assessing its value. Her perfume filled the air, and her heels clicked across the hardwood I'd spent years keeping polished. She complimented the house, but her words were wrapped in mockery. "It's charming," she said, pausing to glance around, in an old-fashioned kind of way. "You've really held on to everything from the past, haven't you, Denise?" I smiled tightly, replying, "Yes, Alina, some things are worth holding on to." Trevor cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, Alina's just saying, maybe it's time to make some changes. You've got a lot of space here you're not even using. A smaller place might be easier to manage." I folded my hands and asked calmly, "Easier for who, Trevor? Me or you?" He looked away, muttering something about me misunderstanding his intentions. But I wasn't mistaken. I could feel it. Something cold had replaced the warmth in his voice. Over the next few weeks, their visits became routine. Every conversation led, one way or another, to the same topic, the house. They never said it directly, but it was always there, hovering between us like a shadow. Trevor started showing me pamphlets for retirement villages and senior communities, trying to disguise the manipulation as care. "You'd have friends your age," he'd say, "and staff to help you. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this place." One day, Alina even brought along her laptop, showing me listings of condos she said were perfect for someone like me. I remember her exact words, "someone like me," as if I were an item in need of repackaging. I didn't react. I smiled, offered tea, and kept my voice steady. "Thank you, dear," I said. "But I'm quite happy right where I am." The smile she gave me was sharp, rehearsed. "Of course, Denise, we're just thinking ahead. Families should plan these things together." Trevor reached over to squeeze my hand. His fingers were stiff, not affectionate. "We just want what's best for you, Mom." "What's best for me?" I thought bitterly. "Or what's best for your bank account?" It became obvious that Alina was pulling the strings. I'd hear her whispering to Trevor when she thought I wasn't listening, using words like inheritance, title, and future assets. I started to keep my phone nearby during every conversation, and recording snippets of their talk. Something told me I might need proof someday. One evening, I decided to test them. I mentioned I was thinking about updating my will, just to see how they'd react. Alina's eyes lit up instantly. "That's such a responsible idea," she said, leaning forward eagerly. "You should definitely make sure Trevor's protected if anything ever happens." Trevor chimed in quickly. "Yeah, Mom. You should let me look over your paperwork when you're ready. You know how confusing that legal stuff can get." I smiled faintly, stirring my tea. "Oh, I'm sure I'll manage," I said. "Your father and I handled plenty of paperwork in our time." The air went still. Alina forced a laugh, trying to brush off the tension. "Well, of course. We just want to help." Help! That word began to sound poisonous. After they left that evening, I sat in the quiet, staring at the front door. My hands were trembling. The house that once felt safe now felt like a prize being hunted. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had shifted. Trevor's eyes, once filled with affection, now held calculation, just like hers. Still, a part of me clung to hope. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe this was just a rough patch between mother and son. But that illusion shattered when Trevor called me one night. His voice curt and businesslike. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about the house. You can't keep avoiding this. I'm just trying to make sure things are taken care of." "Taken care of?" I repeated. "By taking away my home?" He sighed. "It's not like that. You're making this difficult." "Trevor," I said softly, "you're my son. You shouldn't talk to me like this." There was silence on the other end, cold, hollow silence. Then he said, "Maybe you should start thinking less emotionally and more practically." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, the tears pooling in my eyes. The man on that call wasn't the boy I raised. Trevor's smile disappeared that night, replaced by a glare I'll never forget. A week later, I discovered Trevor's real intentions, and it broke me. It was a quiet Thursday morning, the kind where the world feels too still. I was watering my geraniums on the porch when my neighbor Clara waved at me from across the street. Clara had lived next door for nearly 20 years, a kind, observant woman who noticed everything but rarely gossiped. That day, though, her face looked uneasy. "Denise," she called softly, walking closer. "I wasn't sure if I should mention this, but I saw Trevor here the other day while you were out." My watering can froze mid-pour. "Trevor? When?" "2 days ago," she said. "He was standing out front with some man in a suit. They were talking about your house, pointing at the roof, the fence, even the yard. I thought maybe you'd asked him to meet a contractor." My heart started pounding. I hadn't asked Trevor to meet anyone. I thanked Clara, forced a smile, and told her I'd look into it. But inside, panic clawed at me. That evening, I called Trevor. His tone was breezy, too casual. "Oh yeah," he said. "I was just getting an estimate on some repairs for you. You mentioned that the porch railing was getting old, remember?" I hadn't mentioned that. Not once. Something felt wrong. Later that night, when I was cleaning the living room, I found a manila folder under the coffee table. Trevor must have left it behind during his last visit. I almost didn't open it until I saw my own name typed neatly on the top page. It was a property transfer draft. My hands trembled as I read through it. It listed my house, my address, my legal name, everything, and next to new owner, it said Trevor Holt, my son. There were spaces for signatures, witness initials, and dates. It wasn't signed yet, but the intent was clear. I felt my knees give out. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the walls I had painted with my husband all those years ago, staring at the papers that turned my life into a transaction. The tears came quietly, like a betrayal too deep to scream over. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Benson, a calm, gray-haired man who had handled my husband's estate years ago. I explained everything, my voice shaking. He listened carefully, then said, "Denise, it sounds like your son is preparing to coerce or trick you into signing over your property. You need to secure all your legal documents immediately." I spent the rest of that day gathering every record I related of human. Owned deeds, insurance papers, wills, and took them straight to Mr. Benson's office. He made copies, locked them away, and assured me my ownership was still intact. "You've done the right thing," he said, "but you need to be careful. Family manipulation cases can get ugly fast." I wanted to believe Trevor was just confused, that Alina had twisted his thinking. But that illusion shattered the moment I confronted him. He came over that evening, wearing that same arrogant calm he'd developed lately. I held the folder up and said quietly, "What is this?" His expression flickered just for a second, but then he smirked. "You went through my stuff? Don't turn this around," I said. "Why were you meeting with a real estate agent, Trevor?" He sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Because you're being unrealistic, Mom. This house is too much for you. You're wasting money on property taxes and maintenance. I'm trying to help you before you lose it." "Lose it?" I repeated. "Trevor, this house is paid off. There's nothing to lose." He started pacing, rubbing his temples. "You don't get it. You could put that money to better use, travel, comfort, retirement. Alina and I have been looking into options that make sense for everyone." "For everyone," I echoed bitterly. "Or for you two." He stopped and stared at me, his jaw tightening. "You're being paranoid." "No, Trevor," I said softly. "I'm being a mother who's finally seeing her son clearly." The silence stretched between us. For a brief second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Then, in a low voice, he said, "If you don't do this willingly, you might regret it later." I froze. "Is that a threat?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. When the echo finally faded, I sank into the armchair and let the tears fall freely. I wasn't crying for the house, I was crying for the boy I'd raised, for the love that had turned into greed. That night, I locked every door and window. For the first time in my life, I wasn't protecting my son from the world, I was protecting myself from him. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying his words in my mind, "You might regret it later." What did that mean? Would he actually hurt me? The next morning, I called Mr. Benson again. He advised me to install security cameras and keep a log of every interaction with Trevor and Alina. "This is no longer about family," he said. "It's about protecting yourself legally and emotionally." So that's what I did. I started documenting everything. Every call, every message, every visit. I even set up a small notebook near the front door to record dates and times. It felt strange, treating my own son like a threat, but deep down, I knew I wasn't being paranoid anymore. But that didn't stop him. He was just getting started. The betrayal didn't come from Trevor next, it came from someone I trusted even more. In all my years, I'd learned that family can wound you deeper than any stranger ever could. But nothing prepared me for the day my own sister turned against me. Connie and I had always been close, two sisters bound by shared memories, secrets, and decades of late-night talks. After my husband died, she became my rock, the one person I could call when the loneliness felt unbearable. So when Trevor started acting strangely, she was the first person I confided in. I told her everything, how he'd been pushing me to sign things, how I'd found that property transfer draft, how uneasy I felt around him and Alina. At first, she seemed shocked. "Oh, Denise, that's awful," she said, her hands squeezing mine over the phone. "I can't believe Trevor would do something like that." Her voice trembled with sympathy, and I felt a tiny wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't alone. But that comfort didn't last long. A few days later, Connie showed up at my house unannounced. She brought my favorite pie, smiled warmly, and said, "We need to talk." I thought she just wanted to check on me, maybe offer advice. But the moment she sat down at my kitchen table, her tone changed. "Denise," she began carefully, "I think you're overreacting about Trevor. He's just concerned about you." "Overreacting?" "Connie, he tried to transfer the deed to my house." She sighed, the way a mother sighs at a stubborn child. "Maybe he was just trying to get things in order for the future. You've always been too sentimental about that house." Her words stung. "Too sentimental? Connie, this isn't just a building, it's my home. It's where I raised my son, where I lived with my husband. I'm not ready to hand it over. She looked away, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. Trevor told me he's worried about you, she said softly. He thinks you're letting fear control your judgment. Maybe you should just transfer the ownership now and avoid all this conflict. I froze. Trevor told you that? She hesitated, then nodded. My stomach twisted. You've been talking to him behind my back? Don't say it like that, she said quickly. He came to me because he's worried. He thinks Alina might be able to help manage things financially. I laughed bitterly. Manage things? Connie, she's manipulating him, and now she's got you parroting her words. Her eyes narrowed. You've always been dramatic, Denise. Maybe you just can't stand that Trevor has a woman in his life who actually challenges him. That cut deeper than she knew. I stood up, trying to steady my voice. You have no idea what's going on here. You're being used. She frowned. I'm being practical. Unlike you. That was the first time in my life I asked my own sister to leave my house. She didn't argue. She just shook her head, grabbed her purse, and walked to the door. But before she stepped out, she turned and said something that chilled me to the bone. You should just give Trevor the house, Denise. It's going to be his eventually anyway. Why make everyone miserable until then? I stood frozen, watching her leave, the echo of the door closing behind her like a final goodbye. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. My mind raced with every conversation I'd ever had with Trevor and Alina, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. I sat in my husband's old recliner and stared at the wall, the photos of happier times glaring back at me like cruel reminders. I thought about the day Trevor was born, how I had held him in my arms and promised I'd always protect him. How ironic that I now needed protection from him. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I realized what I had to do. I couldn't rely on anyone else anymore, not family, not friends, not even pity. If Trevor and Alina were building some sort of plan, and Connie was now tangled in it too, I needed to be one step ahead. I went to my desk, pulled out a small black notebook, and started writing. I recorded every detail I could remember, dates, conversations, strange looks, the exact words Connie used. I attached copies of the property draft Trevor left behind, stapled them to the back, and wrote in bold letters on the cover, "For Mr. Benson only." The next day, I met with Mr. Benson again. I told him about Connie's sudden change, about how she'd repeated Trevor's words almost word for word. He frowned deeply and said, "It sounds like they're working together. Or at least he's trying to pressure you through people you trust. Don't speak to him or anyone on his behalf without me present from now on." It felt surreal having to lawyer up against my own son, but I nodded. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. That evening, I sat outside on the porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting behind the maple trees, and the wind carried the scent of fresh grass. For a moment, I tried to convince myself everything would be fine. But as I looked toward the road, I saw a car I recognized Trevor's. It slowed near my driveway but didn't stop. Instead, it lingered for a few seconds before driving off. I couldn't see who was in the passenger seat, but I didn't need to. I knew. Alina. They were watching me. Something inside me hardened that night. The mother in me, the one who always forgave, who always made excuses, died quietly on that porch. What replaced her was something else entirely, a woman who refused to be a victim. I went back inside, locked every door, and whispered to myself, "You wanted a fight, Trevor. Fine. You'll get one." If Trevor wanted war, I was going to give him one, but on my terms. I decided to fight back quietly, strategically, and within the law. For weeks, I had lived with a knot of fear sitting heavy in my chest. But that fear eventually hardened into determination. I wasn't going to let my son or his manipulative girlfriend take away the home I'd built with my husband's hands and my own heart. If they wanted to play games with paperwork and persuasion, then I'd answer in the only language they seemed to understand: legal protection. Mr. Benson, my lawyer, was my first call. He listened patiently as I explained everything that had happened: the manipulation, the pressure, the deceit, even Connie's betrayal. When I finally stopped to take a breath, he leaned forward, his voice calm and firm. "Denise, You need to secure your assets now, before they can even attempt anything else. He suggested creating a living trust, a legal shield that would place ownership of the house into a trust under my control, making it nearly impossible for anyone to transfer or sell it without my explicit consent. It meant the property would remain in my name while adding another layer of protection. Even if someone forged documents, the trust structure would nullify any unauthorized transfer attempts. I didn't hesitate. We started the process that same week. The trust papers took days to finalize. Every line, every clause had to be reviewed with precision. I sat across from Mr. Benson's mahogany desk, reading paragraph after paragraph while he explained how each one worked. The language was dense, but I forced myself to understand. This wasn't just legal paperwork, it was armor. When everything was ready, I signed the documents with steady hands. The pen barely trembled, even though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. With that single signature, I had quietly built an invisible wall around my home. Trevor would never know it existed until it was far too late. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even Clara. The fewer people who knew, the better. The following week, Trevor started his visits again, this time with a new tactic. He came bearing flowers, small gifts, and even brought dinner one night. His voice was soft, apologetic, dripping with the kind of charm I hadn't seen in months. "Mom," he said over dinner, "I feel terrible about how I've been acting. I just want us to start over." For a brief moment, I almost believed him. But then, as he helped me clear the table, he said it casually, like it was nothing. "You know, I found this great financial advisor who helps families transfer property without all the taxes. I could set up an appointment for you." There it was again, the mask slipping. I smiled sweetly. "That's thoughtful, Trevor. Maybe next week." Inside, I was boiling. He left that night thinking he'd softened me. But in truth, I was already several steps ahead. A few days later, he came by again, this time with Alina. She carried a folder, pretending it was something harmless. "Just some insurance updates," she said cheerfully, laying the papers on my dining table. "All you have to do is sign here." I looked at her with practiced innocence. "Insurance?" "Yes," she said smoothly. "It's just to make sure everything is in your name. You wouldn't want any confusion later, right?" I smiled. "Oh, of course not. Let me read through it carefully." Her fake smile faltered. "It's pretty standard. We already had someone look over it." "Oh, that's wonderful," I said, still pretending to read. "But you know how old-fashioned I am. I like to understand what I'm signing." The room went quiet. Trevor sighed impatiently, drumming his fingers on the table. "Mom? It's fine. You can trust us." I looked up and met his eyes. I used to think that too. He didn't like that. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might snap. But instead, Alina put a hand on his arm and forced a smile. "No rush," she said through gritted teeth. "We can come back later." "Perfect," I said sweetly, folding the papers and handing them back. "I'll have Mr. Benson look over them first." The way her smile vanished was almost satisfying. That night, after they left, I called Mr. Benson again. I told him about the visit, the papers, and the growing tension. He told me I'd done the right thing by stalling. "They're desperate," he said. "They're testing your boundaries. Don't give them a single inch." So I didn't. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in Trevor's demeanor. He called less often. When he did, his voice carried an edge of frustration. Alina stopped coming altogether. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd realized I wasn't going to cave. But peace never lasts long when greed is involved. One afternoon, a week later, I received a call from the county office. The clerk said a man claiming to be my representative had come in asking for duplicate property documents. My stomach dropped. I asked who it was. "Someone named Trevor Holt," she said. My hands trembled as I thanked her and hung up. He was still trying. Still pushing. Still looking for ways around me. I called Mr. Benson immediately, and he took care of it, flagging my property record with a legal hold that required direct confirmation from me for any future requests. Trevor's little stunt had failed again. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch. The autumn air was cool, and the world outside was quiet. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Trevor had no idea that everything he was scheming for had already slipped through his fingers. The house, my home, was now protected, completely untouchable. He thought he was the one laying traps, but he didn't realize he'd walked straight into mine. And Trevor had no idea he'd already lost the battle he was still trying to start. For a few weeks, everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. After the chaos and deceit, the silence felt almost strange. Trevor stopped calling completely, and Alina disappeared from my life as if she'd never existed. For the first time in months, I was waking up to quiet mornings, brewing coffee without checking over my shoulder, and walking through my house without feeling like every corner held a threat. I told myself maybe it was over, maybe they'd given up. But deep down, I knew better. When someone like Alina sets her sights on something valuable, she doesn't let go. And Trevor, my sweet foolish boy, was still under her spell. It started with little things that could easily be brushed off. One morning, I noticed that a stack of mail on the kitchen counter had been moved. A few envelopes were out of order, like someone had sifted through them. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd moved them myself and just forgotten. Then, a few days later, my spare set of house keys went missing. I checked every drawer, every bag, every pocket I owned. Nothing. I was certain I'd left them hanging by the back door, but they were gone. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside. Around midnight, I could have sworn I heard footsteps on the gravel driveway, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing but darkness. The next morning, I called Clara. She'd become my silent guardian through all this, a neighbor with eyes like a hawk and a heart full of loyalty. When I told her what was happening, she frowned deeply. "You should install cameras," she said. "If he's planning something, you need proof." I hated that I needed to. I hated that I was even considering that my son might trespass on his own mother's property. But I took her advice. Clara's husband helped me install 2 motion sensor cameras, one near the back door and another by the garage. We also added motion lights that would flick on at the slightest movement. For the first few nights, they were quiet. Nothing. Then, on the 5th night, I saw it. It was just after midnight. I couldn't sleep again, so I made myself tea and decided to check the camera feed from my phone. At first, the screen was blank, just a view of the backyard. Then movement. A shadow at the edge of the frame. I froze. The figure crept closer. And when the porch light flicked on, I saw him. Trevor. He was wearing a hoodie, his face half hidden, but I'd know that posture anywhere. He wasn't there to visit, he was sneaking around. He paused by the kitchen window, looked inside, then moved toward the back door. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could barely breathe. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I whispered to the dispatcher what was happening. They told me to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait. From the window, I watched him jiggle the back door handle. When it didn't open, he crouched down near the rail-it, the lock like he was trying to pick it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to open the door and shout his name, to ask him why he was doing this. But fear pinned me in place. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted the street outside. The police car turned into my driveway, sirens blaring softly. Trevor bolted like a frightened animal, disappearing into the trees behind the fence. The officers searched, but he was gone before they arrived. I showed them the camera footage, my hands trembling as I replayed the scene. One of the officers, a kind woman named Detective Harris, looked at me with quiet pity. "That's your son?" she asked gently. I nodded. "That's him." She sighed. "We'll file a report. Do you want to press charges?" The question hit me like a slap. Press charges against my own child? Even after everything he'd done, the words tasted wrong. But then I remembered his threats. His manipulation. The way he'd tried to steal the roof over my head. Yes, I said finally. I want this documented. She nodded and took my statement. Before leaving, she gave me her card. If he comes back, call us immediately. And keep those cameras running. After the police left, I sank onto the couch, my body shaking from the adrenaline. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls themselves were closing in. Every memory of Trevor that once brought warmth now carried a chill. The next morning, Clara came over with breakfast. When I showed her the footage, she covered her mouth in shock. "Oh, Denise," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. There were no words for the kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing your child isn't just lost, he's dangerous. That day, I made new copies of my keys, replaced every lock in the house, and updated my security system. I even had a technician install a silent alarm linked directly to the police station. It made me feel safer, but not entirely, because safety isn't just about locks and cameras, it's about peace of mind, and mine had been stolen long before that night. That evening, I poured myself another cup of tea and sat on the porch. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a brief moment, I let myself breathe. But as I glanced toward the backyard, the faint imprint of Trevor's footsteps was still visible in the dirt. That footage became the first piece of evidence in what would become a full-blown investigation. When I finally confronted Trevor face to face, he didn't even deny it. A week had passed since the night he tried to break into my house. The police had taken the report, the cameras were still rolling, and I'd replaced every lock twice. But I couldn't shake the gnawing unease that followed me from room to room. I knew Trevor wasn't done, he never left things unfinished. Detective Harris called 2 days later. "We've reviewed the footage," she said. "It's solid evidence. But since he didn't actually enter the house or cause damage, we can't press major charges yet. Still, this gives us leverage if he tries again." Her words offered little comfort. It wasn't about the law anymore, it was about my heart. My son had tried to break into my home, and all I had were technicalities keeping him from being punished. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the framed photograph of us on his graduation day. His arm was around me, his smile wide, proud, genuine. I remembered how I'd cried that day, thinking his father would have been so proud of him. Now, looking into that same smile frozen in time, all I felt was sorrow. I needed to see him. I needed to look into his eyes and hear from his own mouth why he was doing this. So, the next morning, I called him. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. "Trevor," I said, "we need to talk, just you and me. Come by this evening." There was a pause. Then he said flatly, "About what?" "You know what." He didn't argue. He simply said, "Fine," and hung up. When I hung up too, my hands were shaking. Clara begged me not to see him alone, but I insisted. "He's my son," I told her. "I need to face him myself." The sky was overcast that evening, heavy with storm clouds. The house felt colder than usual, despite the heater humming in the background. I sat in the living room, waiting, every sound making my pulse jump. At exactly 6 o'clock, his car pulled into the driveway. The sound of his boots on the porch steps made my stomach twist. He knocked once, sharply. When I opened the door, he looked different. Gaunt, tired, with dark circles under his eyes. But there was no remorse in his expression, just irritation, as if my existence were an inconvenience. "Come in," I said quietly. He walked past me without a word, looking around as though inspecting the place. He said, nodding toward the ceiling, "That's cute." I ignored the jab and gestured for him to sit. He didn't. He stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, eyes cold. "I saw you the other night," I said. "On my cameras." His lips twitched into a smirk. "So what? I was just checking on you." "Checking on me?" I repeated. "By sneaking around my backyard at midnight? Trying to open the back door?" He rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. I wanted to see if you were safe. You don't even answer my calls anymore." "You mean the calls where you pressure me to hand over my home?" He scoffed. "You're making this into something it's not." I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out my tablet, showing him the footage. His face appeared on the screen clear as day, creeping through the shadows, testing the lock. For a second, the mask slipped. His confidence cracked. Then he laughed. "You wouldn't dare take that to the police." "I already did," I said, my voice calm but steady. "They know everything." His smirk faltered. "You really went that far?" "I had to," I said. "You left me no choice." For a long moment, we just stared at each other. There was no warmth left between us, no trace of the bond we once shared. It was mother and son by blood, only two strangers standing in the ruins of a relationship built on trust that no longer existed. Then, suddenly, there was movement behind him. The front door opened and Alina walked in. My heart sank. She didn't even bother pretending to be polite this time. "So this is the witch's den," she said, looking around with disdain. "All this fuss over a bunch of old furniture and bricks." Trevor shot her a warning glance, but she didn't stop. She walked right up to me, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Denise, you could make this so much easier. Sign the papers, let Trevor handle things, and we can all move on." I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze. "I will never sign anything. This house is mine and you have no right to it." Alina scoffed. "You're not going to live forever, sweetheart. You might as well make it worthwhile while you can." "Alina," Trevor muttered, his voice low. "That's enough." But I didn't let her words sting. I'd had enough of her venom. "You know, Alina," I said quietly, "I used to think my son was just misguided. But now I see that the poison came from you." She smirked. "Funny. Trevor says you're the poison in his life. Always controlling him, never letting him grow up." I took a deep breath. If controlling him means stopping him from destroying himself, then maybe I am. Trevor's face twisted in frustration. "God, Mom, you just don't get it. You're clinging to this stupid house like it's a person. It's just a building." I stepped closer, my voice trembling but firm. "No, Trevor, it's my home. And the difference between a house and a home is love. Something you seem to have forgotten." For a moment, the anger in his eyes softened just for a second. I thought maybe I saw my son again, buried deep beneath the greed and resentment. But then Alina touched his arm, and whatever humanity flickered there disappeared. He exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. "Fine, have it your way," he said. "But don't expect this to end nicely." "Trevor," I said softly, "don't do this. Please, stop before you destroy what's left of us." He hesitated for the briefest moment, his hand on the doorknob. Then, without looking back, he said coldly, "You already destroyed it." Alina followed him out, smirking over her shoulder. "You'll regret this, Denise. People like you always do." When the door slammed shut, I felt the air leave my lungs. The quiet that followed was heavier than any noise. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, knowing this was no longer a family dispute. It was war. Trevor stormed out, vowing to end this his way. A week later, I got the shock of my life in the mail, an eviction notice. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I remember standing in my driveway that morning, holding the envelope in trembling hands, my name printed neatly across the front. It was from a local property management firm, a company I'd never even heard of. The words on the letter didn't make sense at first. Notice of property transfer and pending vacancy. My knees nearly gave out as I read further. According to the document, I had sold my home. Sold it. To a private buyer through an agent listed under Trevor's name. I rushed inside, my hands shaking, and spread the papers across the dining table. Every signature looked perfect. My name, my initials, even the date in my handwriting. But I hadn't signed a single thing. Not one. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me as rage and disbelief clashed inside my chest. My son hadn't just threatened me anymore, he had forged my signature. I called Mr. Benson, immediately. He answered on the first ring, and I could barely speak. "He did it," I gasped. "Trevor forged the papers. He's trying to take the house." "Mr. Benson told me to stay calm and send him everything immediately." I scanned and emailed the documents while he waited on the line. It took only a few minutes before he said what I already knew deep down. Denise, these are fraudulent. I can see the inconsistencies in the signature. There's hesitation in the pen strokes. But he's filed it as legitimate, which means we have to act fast. My head throbbed. Can he really do this? Not legally, he said. But sometimes people get far enough with forged paperwork that it causes temporary confusion with county records. We'll file an emergency injunction today. I spent the rest of that day at his office, signing affidavits, submitting identity verification, and sitting through endless calls with officials who sounded baffled but polite. Mr. Benson's tone stayed calm and professional, but I could see the anger burning in his eyes. This isn't just about property anymore, he said. This is a criminal act. When I returned home, exhaustion hit me like a wave. I sat in the quiet of the living room, staring at the walls that had seen my entire life play out. For the first time, I didn't feel safe in my own home. Every shadow felt like a threat, every silence like the buildup before a storm. That night, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw Trevor's name on the screen. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Mom," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "I heard from the county that you filed something about the house. What's going on?" "What's going on?" I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. "You forged my signature. You tried to steal my home." He laughed a low, cruel laugh that sent chills through me. "You're being paranoid again. Maybe you forgot you signed something months ago. You've been under a lot of stress." "Trevor!" I shouted. "How could you? How could you do this to me?" There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice so cold it barely sounded like him, he said, "It's just business, Mom. You'll understand someday." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the sound of that last word echoing in my head. Business. The next morning, I went straight to the police station with the forged papers and the recordings of our previous conversations. Detective Harris met me in her office and took everything carefully, her brow furrowed. "This is serious," she said. "We can pursue charges for forgery, attempted fraud, and identity theft." The words "charges against my son" made my stomach turn, but I nodded. "Do it," I whispered. She assured me they would investigate immediately. They'd already begun looking into Alina, who, as it turned out, had a long history of financial manipulation. The detective mentioned that Alina's name had appeared in 2 other complaints involving elderly property owners, people who had mysteriously signed away homes or accounts they swore they'd never touched. Hearing that both relieved and crushed me at the same time. So I was right about her, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. By evening, Mr. Benson called with some good news. "The injunction was granted," he said. "Legally, your ownership stands untouched. They can't move forward with anything." I felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. Because relief doesn't erase betrayal. Over the next few days, my phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers. Some were spam, others were Trevor calling from new phones. I ignored them all. Then one night, I got a voicemail, his voice, slurred and angry. "You think you've won? You can't keep this forever. You'll die, and I'll get it anyway." I replayed it 3 times, each word slicing deeper. That was the moment something inside me broke for good. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a target. I forwarded the voicemail to Detective Harris and Mr. Benson. Both of them told me to keep my doors locked and my cameras running. "We're building a case," she said. "You've got enough evidence now that this will hold up in court." Still, I couldn't help but feel that I'd lost something far greater than property. I'd lost my only child, the boy I once held when he was scared, the boy I nursed through sickness, the boy who used to hug me just because he wanted to. Now that boy was gone. Replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I sat alone that night in the dark, listening to the ticking clock and wondering where I'd gone wrong. I wasn't crying anymore, just hollow, drained. I wasn't sure if this was the end of his madness or only the beginning, but I wasn't going to hide. I was going to finish this once and for all. The deeper the police dug, the uglier the truth became. It was strange, really, how quickly a life could shift from quiet routines to police reports and court documents. A few months earlier, I had been pruning roses in the garden, reading mystery novels on the porch, and wondering if I should repaint the living room. Now, my days revolved around evidence, affidavits, and recorded calls from detectives. Detective Harris kept me updated every few days. Her voice was calm but steady, the kind of tone that made you believe she'd seen every kind of heartbreak before. "We've been digging into Alina's background," she told me one afternoon. "You were right to be suspicious. She's been linked to at least 3 other cases of elder financial abuse." The word abuse hit me like a punch. "So this was planned?" I asked quietly. "Almost certainly," she said. "She targets older individuals with assets, especially those with family connections she can exploit through manipulation. Trevor fits her pattern perfectly." Hearing that should have comforted me. It proved that I wasn't crazy, but instead, it tore me apart. Because that meant my son wasn't the victim I wanted him to be. He wasn't tricked or coerced. He had chosen to help her. A few days later, Detective Harris and another officer came to my house to collect the original forged documents for forensic analysis. They wanted to compare the handwriting to Trevor's and Alina's. When I handed over the folder, I noticed something in the detective's eyes, a mix of pity and admiration. "You've been incredibly brave, Mrs. Holt," she said softly. "Most people in your situation freeze up or give in. You've done everything right." Brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. That night, Clara came over with dinner, as she often did. We sat in the kitchen eating quietly, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. After a while, she said, "You know, I saw Trevor's car parked 2 streets down yesterday. Do you think he's still watching you?" I sighed. "Probably. But I don't think he'll risk another confrontation, not with the police involved." Clara frowned. "I hope you're right." The next morning, my fears were confirmed. Detective Harris called again, her voice tight with urgency. "Denise, I want you to stay inside today. We've discovered something new." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Trevor's been helping Alina contact potential buyers for your property. They were planning to sell it to a developer overseas before the injunction went through. We found emails between them and the agency. He used your name, your financial records, everything." I sank into a chair, clutching the phone. He was going to sell my home to strangers?" "Yes," she said quietly. "And it looks like he and Alina were preparing to transfer the funds through a shell company she set up in another state. It's organized, premeditated, and criminal." My heart broke all over again. Every piece of evidence painted a clearer picture, and every brushstroke made my son look darker. I wanted to scream. To ask why. Why would he do this to me? Why was money worth more than blood, more than love? But I didn't cry this time. The tears had dried up weeks ago. Instead, I asked, "What happens now?" She explained that the police were building a solid case. The forgery, the attempted fraud, the trespassing, each was a separate charge. Combined, they painted a story of intent. Once they had enough evidence linking Trevor directly to the sale attempt, they could move to arrest. I hung up and sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the living room window. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and I thought about all the storms that had passed over this house, the ones my husband and I had weathered together. This one, though it wasn't rain or thunder, it was betrayal. Later that evening, I gathered every piece of correspondence. I had texts, emails, voice messages, and organized them into folders. I even printed screenshots and placed them in binders. If this was going to end in court, I wanted to be ready. A few days later, Detective Harris called again, this time with a small spark of hope in her tone. "Denise, we've got something. The forensic analysis confirms the signature was forged by Trevor, and we've also traced bank activity showing Alina sent him a large transfer right after the paperwork was filed. It looks like she was paying him for his cooperation." I felt my breath catch. "So he sold me out for money." "Yes," she said softly, "but this gives us everything we need. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case for formal charges. I'll be in touch soon." After she hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. There was no satisfaction in knowing they'd finally caught him. There was only emptiness. I thought about the little boy who used to bring me, wildflowers from the yard, who used to whisper, "I love you, Mommy," before bed. That night, I prayed not for Trevor's freedom, not for his punishment, but for clarity. I prayed that I'd have the strength to face what was coming next. Because deep down, I knew that this wasn't just the end of a scheme, it was the end of the bond between a mother and her son. A few days later, Detective Harris called again. Her voice was steady, almost solemn. "Mrs. Holt, the warrants have been approved. We'll be making arrests soon. Stay home and keep your phone on." I thanked her quietly and hung up. Then I walked through my house, touching the walls, the photos, the furniture that held a lifetime of memories. I whispered to the empty rooms, "He'll never take this from me. Not this. Not ever." And when the police told me they were ready to make arrests, I finally exhaled for the first time in months. The day they came for Trevor was both the hardest and most relieving day of my life. It was early morning when the call came in. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring blankly at the garden outside. Detective Harris's number flashed on my phone. My pulse immediately quickened. "Mrs. Holt," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's happening today. We've obtained arrest warrants for both Trevor Holt and Alina Vega. We're executing them this morning. You don't need to come down, but I wanted you to know before the news gets out." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I had spent weeks waiting for this moment, hoping for justice, fearing it at the same time. "Will it be public?" I asked softly. "There's a team going to their apartment," she said. "We'll handle everything professionally." When I hung up, I just sat there in silence. My hands were trembling. I had imagined this moment countless times, Trevor finally facing consequences, but now that it was real, I couldn't stop the ache rising in my throat. This was my son. My only child. Still, I knew this had to happen. There was no going back. I couldn't bring myself to sit still. Around 9 o'clock, I grabbed my keys and drove across town, my heart pounding the whole way. I didn't tell Detective Harris, but I needed to see it. I needed closure. When I reached Trevor's apartment complex, police cars were already lined up along the curb, red and blue lights flashing in the pale morning sun. I parked a block away, far enough not to be noticed, and watched from across the street. Officers stood at the door, knocking firmly. After a few moments, Trevor appeared, looking disheveled and confused. He wasn't expecting them. 2 officers stepped forward, showing him the warrant. Alina appeared behind him, shouting almost immediately. The scene unfolded in slow motion. Trevor tried to argue, gesturing wildly, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything." But the officers remained calm, professional, explaining the charges as they placed the cuffs on his wrists. I could see the shock on his face, the disbelief that his actions had finally caught up with him. Then his eyes met mine. I hadn't expected him to notice me across the street, hidden partly behind a tree, but he did. Our eyes locked for a long, unbearable second. His expression wasn't sadness or remorse, it was pure hatred. I'll never forget that look. Alina screamed as 2 officers restrained her. "This is all your fault, Trevor. You said she wouldn't fight back," she shouted, her voice echoing across the street. The doors slammed shut, and the sound felt final. I stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. The police convoy pulled away, leaving behind an eerie stillness. People had gathered to watch, neighbors, onlookers, faces filled with curiosity and whispers. I could already hear bits of gossip floating through the air. "Isn't that the woman whose son tried to steal her house? Poor thing. Imagine your own child doing that to you." I turned and walked back to my car before anyone could approach me. The whole drive home, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't stop seeing his face in my mind, the anger, the resentment, the way he glared at me like I was the enemy. When I pulled into my driveway, Clara was waiting on her porch. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around me. I finally broke down, sobbing into her shoulder. "They arrested him," I whispered. "They actually did it." She held me tightly. "You did what you had to do, Denise. You protected yourself." But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. That night, Detective Harris called again to confirm the charges: forgery, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit property theft. Each word was heavy, like stones pressing against my chest. She also told me that Alina had already started talking. Apparently, she was eager to pin most of the blame on Trevor, claiming he was the mastermind behind the plan. I knew that wasn't true. Alina was a manipulator, and she had used him from the start, but I also knew Trevor wasn't innocent. He'd chosen his path. When Harris finished listing the charges, she asked gently, "Do you want to know his bail status?" I hesitated, then nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "He's being held without bail until arraignment," she said. "Given the forged documents and financial intent, the judge wants to review it closely." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the empty chair across from me, the chair where Trevor used to sit every Sunday when he came for dinner. I could almost hear his laughter again, see his grin as he teased me about my cooking. The memories twisted like knives. For days after the arrest, my phone rang non-stop. Family members, reporters, nosy neighbors, all wanting to know my side. My sister Connie even called, her voice trembling. "Denise, how could you do this to him? He's your son." I felt the anger rise again. "How could he do this to me?" I shot back. "He tried to steal my life, Connie, my home. He made his choice." She started to cry, but I ended the call before she could say more. I didn't have the energy to defend myself anymore. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the wind ripple through the trees. I felt empty, hollowed out, but also strangely calm. There was no more pretending, no more second-guessing. The truth was out. Justice was in motion. And yet, beneath the calm, something inside me whispered that it wasn't truly over, because Trevor wasn't the kind of man to surrender quietly. But I didn't realize that Trevor had one last card to play. The next day, my phone started buzzing non-stop. At first, I thought it was more reporters calling about Trevor's arrest. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw dozens of notifications from social media messages, mentions, and friend requests from people I didn't even know. My stomach sank before I even opened the first one. "Greedy old woman gets her own son arrested. Imagine calling the cops on your child for a house. She deserves to lose everything." Each comment felt like a punch to the gut. Within minutes, I realized what had happened. Someone, most likely Trevor or Alina, had leaked my private information online. They'd posted my full name, my address, and a twisted version of the story that painted me as some selfish, controlling mother who wanted to ruin her son's life. I could hardly breathe. I clicked on the post that had started it all. It was on a local gossip page with thousands of followers. The caption read, "Woman refuses to give her son his rightful inheritance and has him arrested instead. How cruel can you be?" Attached was a blurry picture of me from years ago, probably taken from Trevor's old social media account. The comment section was flooded with hate. "Monster. She probably deserves to be alone. Some moms are toxic and greedy." My hands shook so violently that I dropped my phone. It clattered onto the kitchen floor, but I didn't pick it up. I just stood there, staring at nothing, the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I had survived betrayal, deceit, and threats from my own child, but nothing could have prepared me for the cruelty of strangers. That evening, Clara came rushing over after seeing the posts herself. She looked furious. "This is disgusting," she said. "They're trying to humiliate you." "It's working," I whispered. My voice cracked. "They're turning everyone against me." Clara placed a hand on my shoulder. "Let them talk. The truth will come out. People forget fast." But I wasn't so sure. By the next morning, my phone was still buzzing, the notifications relentless. Someone had shared the post to a community forum, and now people from neighboring towns were chiming in. Some even sent me direct messages, cruel, hateful words from people who knew nothing about me, nothing about what really happened. I called Detective Harris to tell her about the online harassment. She sighed. "I'm not surprised. Alina's good at manipulation, both in person and online. We've seen her pull stunts like this before. I'll make sure our cyber unit documents everything." Don't respond to any of it, Mrs. Holt. Silence is your best weapon right now. So I stayed silent. I deleted my accounts, turned off my phone for days, and shut myself inside my house. The same house that used to feel like a sanctuary now felt like a cage of shame. Every time I looked out the window, I imagined people whispering, judging, assuming the worst. Even Connie called again this time, not to scold but to cry. "Everyone's saying horrible things, Denise," she said. "You're all over the internet. I don't know what to believe anymore." Her words stung deeper than the stranger's. "You don't know what to believe?" I asked softly. "After everything I told you? After he forged my signature?" There was silence on the other end, followed by a shaky sigh. "I just wish this hadn't gone public." "So do I said bitterly. But Trevor made sure of that. After that call, I sat in the dark for a long time, my mind spinning. I'd spent months trying to protect myself from my son, but now I had to protect myself from the world. And yet, in some twisted way, the humiliation made me stronger. Every cruel comment, every rumor, every lie they spread, it all hardened something inside me. I refused to let Trevor and Alina define my story. A week later, the noise online started to quiet down. People moved on to the next scandal, as they always do. The silence that followed was suffocating but peaceful in a strange way. I spent the following days focusing on the upcoming court hearings. Mr. Benson called to tell me that the prosecution had finalized the case. "They've got more than enough evidence now," he said. "Between the forged documents, the digital communications, and Alina's prior history, this case is ironclad." "And Trevor?" I asked. "He's being represented by a public defender. Apparently, Alina drained his accounts before the arrest. She's turned on him completely." The irony was sharp enough to hurt. She'd used him, and when things fell apart, she'd left him behind. Just like I'd warned him she would. A part of me wanted to feel pity, but that part had been bruised too many times to exist anymore. The court date came quickly. The day I walked into that courtroom, the same gossip pages that had once vilified me now ran updates about the trial. "Local woman vindicated after son's fraud arrest," one headline read. People were starting to see the truth, but the damage was already done. When I entered the courtroom, Trevor was already seated with his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow, his confidence gone. He didn't look at me. Not once. Alina sat several rows behind him, separated by her own legal team. Her usual smugness was gone too. As the proceedings began, I sat quietly beside Mr. Benson. Every document, every recording, every video clip was displayed before the judge. The truth was finally unraveling in public, just as my humiliation had been. Only this time, it wasn't lies being spread, it was justice. I watched Trevor's face as they played the security footage of him in my backyard, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. I saw fear, regret, maybe. But it was too late for regret. But the verdict that followed erased any remaining doubt. When the judge read the verdict, time seemed to freeze. The courtroom was utterly silent except for the steady hum of the ceiling fan and the faint shuffle of papers from the prosecution's desk. I sat straight in my chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Every muscle in my body trembled with a mix of dread and anticipation. Months of fear, pain, and betrayal all leading to this moment. The judge's voice was calm but final as she began to read. In the matter of State versus Trevor Holt and Alina Vega, after reviewing all evidence presented, the court finds the defendants guilty on all counts. The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. For a moment, I wasn't even sure I'd heard her correctly. "Guilty," the judge continued, her tone unwavering. "For charges of forgery, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit property theft, the defendants will be remanded to state custody pending sentencing." Alina's sharp intake of breath broke the stillness. She turned toward Trevor, eyes wide, fury flashing across her face. "You said we'd win!" she hissed. But Trevor didn't respond. He sat there motionless, staring straight ahead, his hands trembling on the table. I studied him from across the courtroom, the same boy I'd once rocked to sleep in my arms, now wearing the expression of a man who had finally realized the full weight of his choices. There was no confidence left, no smirk, no defiance. Just emptiness. Mr. Benson leaned toward me and whispered, "It's over." But it didn't feel over. Not yet. The judge began summarizing the evidence. My testimony, the forged documents, the video footage, the bank transfers. Each piece of proof was a nail sealing the coffin of what Trevor and Alina had built together. When she mentioned the video of Trevor sneaking around my backyard, I had to look away. I couldn't bear to see the footage again. I could still remember that night too vividly, the fear, the heartbreak, the moment I realized my son was capable of something I'd never imagined. When the judge finally announced sentencing would take place in 2 weeks, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Cameras flashed outside the doors. The bailiffs began escorting Alina and Trevor out. As Trevor stood, he turned slightly and glanced back at me. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I expected anger, maybe even hatred, but what I saw instead was something far worse: defeat. His mouth opened as if to speak, but the bailiff's firm hand on his shoulder cut him off. He lowered his head and walked out. My heart ached so deeply I thought I might collapse. I wanted to shout after him to tell him I never wanted this, that I just wanted my son back, but the words died before they could form. When the courtroom finally cleared, Mr. Benson gathered our things quietly. "You did the right thing," he said softly. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat burned. The right thing rarely feels good. Outside, the sky was gray and heavy, mirroring the weight in my chest. Reporters waited near the courthouse steps, shouting questions. "Mrs. Holt, how do you feel about your son's conviction? Do you have any message for him? Do you think you'll forgive him someday?" Forgive him. I didn't answer any of them. I walked straight to my car, each step feeling heavier than the last. Once inside, I sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the raindrops gathering on the windshield. The world outside blurred through the glass, and for a moment, I felt like I was dissolving too, becoming just another story for people to read and forget. When I got home, Clara was waiting for me. She opened the door before I could even take off my coat. "I saw it on the news," she said. "It's finally over, isn't it?" I smiled weakly. "The court says so." She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself cry, not from fear or anger, but from the hollow relief that came with finality. Later that night, I received a call from Mr. Benson again. "The sentencing hearing will be short," he said. "Given the evidence and Alina's prior record, I expect she'll receive a longer sentence than Trevor." "How long?" I asked quietly. "She's facing up to 10 years. Trevor's likely to receive 3 to 5, maybe less with parole." I thanked him, hung up, and sat by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames. The thought that my son, my baby, would spend years behind bars didn't bring me joy, it brought me sorrow. But there was also a small part of me that hoped maybe, just maybe, those years would give him time to think, to remember who he used to be. I didn't want revenge. I wanted redemption. But that wasn't something I could give him anymore. The next morning, as I watered my garden, I noticed something strange: a letter in my mailbox with no return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line, written in Trevor's familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry, Mom." That was it. No explanations. No excuses. Just those 3 words. I stood there for a long time. The wind tugging at my hair. The scent of damp earth rising from the soil. I pressed the note to my chest and closed my eyes. Maybe it was genuine. Maybe it wasn't. But it was something. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of peace. When the sentencing day finally came, the courtroom was quieter, emptier. There were no cameras this time, no reporters shouting questions. Just a handful of people and the sound of the judge's voice echoing through the chamber. Alina received 8 years in prison. Trevor got 4. As they were led away, I didn't cry. I simply whispered a silent prayer for him. For me. For all that had been lost. The judge commended me for my courage in standing up against family exploitation, and as I walked out of that courtroom, I thought it was over until Trevor's lawyer stopped me in the hallway. He said Trevor wanted to speak to me before being transferred. Against all reason, I agreed. When I saw Trevor in the holding room, he looked like a stranger. They led me down a narrow hallway, the sound of my shoes echoing against the linoleum floor. The officer escorting me didn't speak. She just motioned toward a small metal door at the end of the corridor. I hesitated before stepping through, bracing myself for what waited on the other side. The room was cold, gray, and painfully sterile. A metal table sat in the center with 2 chairs, and beyond the glass partition, Trevor waited. His orange prison uniform was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion. For a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the child who used to run into my arms after school, the one who used to beg me to make pancakes for dinner. But the illusion vanished as soon as he looked up. His eyes were empty, lifeless. I sat across from him slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Silence between us was thick years of love, resentment, and regret hanging in the air like smoke. Finally, he broke it. "You ruined my life," he said. His voice was calm, but his words were like a blade. I stared at him, struggling to breathe. "Trevor, I didn't ruin your life. You did that yourself." He leaned back, smirking faintly. "You always think you're so righteous, always pretending you're the victim." "I am the victim," I said quietly. "You forged my name, tried to steal my home, and dragged me through months of hell." He shrugged, his eyes cold. "It was just a house." "No," I said, my voice trembling. "It was my life. Your father built that house with his hands. I poured every ounce of love I had into making it a home for you. And you wanted to take it from me for money." Something flickered in his expression, shame. "Maybe, but it disappeared just as quickly." "I needed it," he said simply. "Alina said we could turn it into something big, something profitable." "Alina used you," I said firmly. "She used your love, your desperation, and your weakness. And you let her." He slammed his hands on the table, startling the guard outside the door. "Don't you dare talk about her like that." I didn't flinch. "She turned on you the moment things went wrong, Trevor. She testified against you to save herself. That's who she is." He stared at me, breathing hard. I could see the anger in his face slowly melting into something else, something raw and broken. After a long pause, he said, almost whispering, "You never believed in me." My heart twisted. "That's not true." "Yes, it is," he snapped. "You always treated me like a child, like I couldn't handle anything on my own. You hovered, you criticized. You never trusted me to do things my way." I felt my throat tighten. "I hovered because I loved you. Because after your father died, I was terrified of losing you too." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Well, you lost me anyway." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Not because I wanted to, Trevor, because you chose to walk away." He didn't respond. The silence stretched again, heavier this time. I reached into my purse, pulling out a small photograph, the same one from years ago, the 2 of us smiling in the backyard, covered in dirt after planting flowers together. I slid it across the table. He looked at it but didn't touch it. "I keep this in my kitchen," I said softly. "Whenever I doubt myself, I look at that picture and remember that once, you loved me. That somewhere inside, that boy still exists." He stared at the photo for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, "That boy's gone." "Then I'll keep believing he's not," I replied. For the first time, his eyes met mine without hatred, just emptiness, a kind of tired resignation. "You think I can come back from this?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know you'll have to want to. No one can do it for you. Time to remember who you were before greed took over. Before Alina. Before all of this." He leaned forward, his expression darkening again. "And what about you, Mom? What happens to you now? You gonna sit in that house until you die?" I took a slow breath. "Maybe I will. But I'll die, knowing I fought for what mattered. Can you say the same?" His jaw clenched. For a brief moment, I thought I saw tears in his eyes, but he blinked them away before they could fall. I stood to leave. "Goodbye, Trevor." Turned toward the door, his voice stopped me. "You'll die alone in that house," he said coldly. I froze. The words cut through me like glass, but I didn't turn back. Without looking at him, I replied, "Maybe. But at least I'll die with integrity." I walked to the door, the sound of my heels echoing off the concrete floor. The guard opened it for me, and just before I stepped out, I heard him say, "Quieter this time. You were never supposed to win." I paused but didn't answer. I simply stepped through the doorway, leaving him behind in the gray emptiness of that holding room. As the door closed, I felt the air shift, the heavy, suffocating tension that had bound me to him for so long finally lifting. My heart still ached, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. He could hate me, resent me, curse me until his last breath, but he couldn't hurt me anymore. And as the door closed behind me, I realized I finally had my closure. I spent the next few months rebuilding my life from the ashes of betrayal. The trial was over, the sentence handed down, and my house was finally safe. But peace didn't return all at once. It came in slow, hesitant waves, like a wounded animal testing the air after a storm. For weeks, I still woke up expecting a knock at the door, a phone call, or another trick waiting to unravel everything I had rebuilt. But none came. Trevor was gone. Alina was gone. And what remained was me, the mother who had survived them both. At first, the silence felt strange, almost foreign. The rooms echoed differently, without tension, without fear. It took me a while to realize that silence, once something I feared, had become my sanctuary. I decided to start small. I repainted the walls in soft shades of cream and blue, the colors my husband once said reminded him of the ocean. It made the house feel new, reborn, but still familiar. I replaced the locks one final time. Not because I feared intrusion, but because it felt symbolic, like closing a chapter I'd spent too long trapped inside. Clara helped me in ways she'll never fully understand. She brought laughter back into my home. She'd come over every morning with a thermos of coffee, her hands full of paintbrushes or garden gloves. Together, we cleaned, fixed, and replanted. My front yard had once been overgrown and wild, a reflection of the chaos that had consumed my life. Now it bloomed again, rows of hydrangeas, marigolds, and lavender. I created a small garden patch in the back corner and placed a single white bench there. It became my favorite spot to sit each evening, watching the sunset fade over the horizon. I named it the Garden of Healing. It felt poetic to give beauty back to the earth after so much ugliness had taken root in my life. As the weeks passed, I began to breathe easier. I didn't jump at every sound anymore. The nightmares that once plagued my sleep began to fade. I learned to sit in the stillness and not feel lonely. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter from the correctional facility. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Trevor's. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was short, written in his messy scrawl. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I forgive myself. Alina's gone." She stopped writing. "I think she's found someone else to blame. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't know who I am anymore. Maybe I never did, but I hope you're okay. I hope the house is still standing. Trevor." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. The ache in my chest was deep but not sharp. There was no anger left, no bitterness, only a quiet sadness for what could have been. That night, I sat in the garden under the stars and whispered into the cool night air, "I forgive you, Trevor." The words felt heavy but freeing. Forgiveness wasn't about him deserving it, it was about me needing peace. After that, I knew exactly what I wanted to do next. The house that had nearly torn my life apart would no longer be a symbol of greed. I met with Miss Benson again and told him my decision. I wanted to update the Living Trust, not to give it to any family, but to donate it to a local charity that provided housing for single mothers and women escaping domestic or financial abuse. Mr. Benson looked at me for a long moment before smiling. "A full circle in a way." "Yes," I said quietly. "This house nearly destroyed me. But maybe it can save someone else." He nodded and handled everything personally. When the paperwork was finalized, I signed it with steady hands. For the first time, that signature didn't feel like fear, it felt like freedom. Over the next few months, life found a gentle rhythm again. I joined a local women's support group where we shared stories of resilience and survival. Some had faced things far worse than mine: violence, homelessness, complete abandonment. Listening to them made me realize how fragile yet powerful human strength can be. One day after a meeting, a young woman named Kara approached me. She was only 24, shy, her eyes tired but kind. "Mrs. Holt," she said softly, "they told me your story. About your son. About what you went through. I just wanted to say you gave me hope. I thought I'd never recover from what my family did to me, but seeing you smile like that makes me think I might." I smiled back at her, tears stinging my eyes. "You will," I told her. "It takes time. But you will." Walking home that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, my pain had defined me, but now, it was my strength that did. The seasons changed, and with each passing month, the house grew warmer again, filled with light and laughter. Clara and I hosted neighborhood teas, small gatherings, nothing extravagant, just moments of normalcy. The same neighbors who once whispered behind curtains now stopped by with smiles and hugs. They knew the truth now, and they saw not a victim, but a survivor. Sometimes I still thought of Trevor. I imagined him sitting alone in his cell, perhaps reading books, maybe reflecting on what he'd done. Maybe not. Either way, I no longer let those thoughts drown me. I'd learned to release what I couldn't control. Late one evening, I walked through the house, running my hand along the banister, the walls, the windows. Every inch of it held pieces of my life: joy, grief, love, loss. And though I knew it would someday belong to someone else, tonight, it was mine. Completely mine. As I stepped into the garden, the wind brushed gently through the flowers, carrying the scent of lavender. I looked up at the stars and whispered a small prayer, not for revenge, not for justice, but for peace. Peace for Trevor, peace for me, peace for this home that had seen both the best and worst of humanity. I sat on the white bench and closed my eyes, letting the night wrap around me like a blanket. He may have tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I took back something far greater. Because my final move wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom.